Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today in chapel is Dr. Stephen H. Webb. Webb graduated from Wabash College in 1983 and was one of the two seniors asked to deliver the commencement address. He completed his Ph.D. at the University of Chicago and has been teaching at Wabash for 24 years. He's the author of numerous articles and 11 books. He has written about Bob Dylan, the history of sound, the doctrine of providence, political theology, and various issues in the philosophy of religion. His wife, Diane Timmerman, is a full professor of theater at Butler University, and they live with their 4 children in Brownsburg. Here to give his talk titled, "What is Conservatism at Wabash?" Dr. Stephen Webb.
Thank you. My thesis today is the following. Wabash College, in many ways, exemplifies the principles and values of conservatism. That statement, of course, begs the question of what conservatism is. Indeed, when I was originally asked to give this chapel talk, I thought I would spend some time over Christmas break making a list of principles that I thought embody conservatism. And as I looked over those principles, I couldn't get my mind off Wabash. Maybe that's because I had not yet written my syllabi, let alone the fact that I had still not read some of the books that I was teaching this semester. But I kept coming around to the idea that Wabash itself is essentially conservative in many ways. Now, let me offer a preliminary observation and 2 qualifications to my thesis. The preliminary observation is that higher education is often something we take for granted in America. Higher education is, and that is a good conservative word that liberals treat with disdain, higher, a privilege. It is not and never has been something that everyone can or should have. That is as true in South Africa, where the mother of a prospective student was recently trampled to death when a crowd of thousands surged through the gates of a university, hoping to obtain one of the last available openings for registration, as it is in the United States, where scholarships and opportunities abound. Higher education is a luxury, no matter how high or cheap the costs. It is not a basic human right, because it is not for everyone. That might sound like a shocking claim, but let me explain. I take it that rights are correlative to capacity or potential. To have a right to something, like speech, assembly, or religion, is to have a potential that is a necessary property of one's nature. Humans, as humans, need freedom to speak. They need freedom to assemble. They need freedom to worship. They need these freedoms in order to fulfill the potentials that make us human. Those capacities are what we are, and any government that prevents us from exercising them is denying something basic about our humanity. Such is not the case with higher education. Higher education is, as its name suggests, higher than the opportunity for education that everyone does deserve. Yes, that is right. Education is a right. The exercise of one's mind is the most important capacity that we have. But higher education is different from, for lack of a better word, lower education. Higher education is not about learning the basics, nor is it about job training, although that is what it has become at many universities these days. When higher education is treated as a right, it will inevitably be reduced to job training and basic factual knowledge. When it is treated as a privilege, it will be treated as something that is leisurely, something that is not immediately productive, something that cannot be quantified in monetary terms, something that is not an investment. As a privilege, higher education has to do with culture, not technical and profitable skills. At its best, higher education is what nations provide to the select few who are interested in and able to contribute to the preservation of that nation's and indeed the world's culture. As such, it can be very profitable to study higher education. It can make you more worldly, more thoughtful, more engaged, and in the end, a better doctor, a better lawyer, a better businessman, a better teacher. But higher education should have nothing to do with studying how best to make a profit. Another name for higher education is, of course, the liberal arts. And if I had to offer a definition of the liberal arts, it would be this: a place and time set apart to enable people to expand the number of things that they love, so that they will never be bored. I don't mean that boredom, by the way, is a bad thing. In fact, boredom is a good thing, precisely because it drives us out of ourselves to discover new things to love. Boredom is that dullness in the mind that we feel when we are not properly exercising our capacity for thought. Boredom, in fact, is so strong, Augustine thought pride was at the heart of original sin, but Origen got it right, I think. He thought sloth or boredom was at the heart of original sin. Boredom is so strong that only love can overcome it. And when I say love, I don't mean curiosity or passion. I mean a lifetime of engagement in something that is so much greater than yourself that the closer you come to it, the more complex it becomes. Only things that are mysterious can be loved, which is why we think of love primarily as a bond between two persons. Persons are mysterious. But you can love more than people. Ultimately, of course, your loves need to be ordered, which suggests that there must be a principle of love that transcends all of your loves and is a source and object of your love that is something itself like love. And the principle, source, and object of love are what people in Western culture call God. Higher education without God is therefore impossible, which is surely why so many of our hyper-secularized colleges and universities have turned their backs on what makes higher education higher than technical skills and basic education. If love is not itself something greater than what we bring to it, then love becomes mere curiosity or emotion or self-interest, and the whole project of higher education collapses. Higher education, then, in a way, is where students should learn to love. For example, learning to love numbers entails learning not to love the profit you can make from manipulating numbers. And the same goes for learning to love the laws of nature, which entails learning not to love the way we can use those laws to exploit nature, and so on. Much the same can be said about the social and human sciences. Learning to love the various ways we form communities means learning not to love the skills required to gain power in those communities. Just as learning to love what it means to be a person entails learning not to love the ways we can have of manipulating each other. Literature and art especially provide good test cases of love, since beauty is the most important portal opening onto the true and the good. And thus, learning to love beauty means learning just how easy it is and tempting to turn the beautiful object into something ugly by treating it as a mere plaything of the lowest human motivations and machinations. The study of history, likewise, is, from this perspective, the limit case of higher education, since it is the most difficult task of all to learn to love the dead. Now, that's my preliminary observation. Now, permit two qualifications of my thesis. First, by arguing that Wabash College exemplifies the principles of conservatism, I am not saying that you have to be a conservative to love Wabash. And I'm certainly not saying that you have to be a Republican to love Wabash. I know a lot of faculty who really get Wabash, who love this school every bit as much as I do or more than I do, and who are members of the Democratic Party. Indeed, I am not even saying that only Republicans are conservative. There are conservative Democrats. I've been arguing with several of them for years about this. There are conservative Democrats who would agree with me with much that I have to say today, just as there are libertarian Republicans who would disagree with much that I have to say today. So I'm not talking in this talk about partisan politics, although I do happen to believe that the two political parties do, more often than not, represent their respective political philosophies. Nonetheless, partisan politics is a game of strategy and luck, and politicians do not hold themselves to the standards of philosophical consistency, let alone rational coherence. I should say, however, that I do think that someone who both loves Wabash and rejects all the conservative principles that I'm going to lay out for you today probably loves Wabash for reasons quite different than my reasons. I should also say that I think that even liberal Democrats who love Wabash are probably a lot less liberal than they think they are, precisely because loving Wabash has had a good, if subliminal, influence on their political views. My second qualification is that when I say that Wabash exemplifies conservative principles, I mean Wabash at its best. Now, on to the defense and development of my thesis. 10 principles. The first principle of conservatism is the value of conserving the past. Perhaps that is why so many devout religious people are conservative. Being religious, especially in the modern world, is a profound act of conservation. Even the most modern of worship styles, even the lowest of church liturgies, pays an essential debt to the past. Going to church on Sundays, attending synagogue on Saturdays, going to the mosque on Fridays, is an act of willful rebellion against the modern spirit of consumerism, individualism, hedonism, and subjectivism. Where else in these days do you get a chance to sing with one another? People used to sing with each other all the time around pianos in homes. But in these days, outside of school choirs, singing as a community is a rare event, and that is just one of the many things that Wabash has in common with religious communities. We sing together. Singing together is a ritual that conserves the past, putting us into an intimate relationship of real intimacy with our ancestors and forebears. Wabash is a beautiful campus, but it's also a construction made of memories. We honor the dead because we know we owe them a debt we can never fully repay. And precisely because we are so grateful for this institution, we know that the dead, for the most part, were better men and women than we are. They had more vision, more moral strength, more courage of their convictions than we can muster. We are denied the easy and narcissistic conceit that the modern world is a much, much better place than the past, that we are much, much improved, morally improved than our ancestors. We know better than that because we live in a community that cuts across time to include the dead and the living in an ongoing conversation about the true, the good, and the beautiful. And the uniting of the present and the future with the past is one of the most beautiful things that Wabash College shares with Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and all other world religions. Second principle is a corollary of this first principle. First principle is conserving the past. The second principle is the idea that significant social change should always be gradual. Institutions that have worked should be revised with great caution. I think Wabash at its best exemplifies this ideal. Ideas and institutions that have survived and flourished over time carry the weight of presumption in their favor. Once something is eliminated, it can rarely, if ever, be replaced. Conservatives, in fact, are very suspicious of the idea that the use of rationality inevitably leads to social progress. Conservatives suspect that highly educated people are prone to think they are smarter than they really are, and that the educated elite are not sufficiently sensitive to the law of unintended consequences, which states that when you try to fix something, you will inevitably change the thing you are fixing in ways that will not be under your control. As the old proverb says, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. The third principle is personal responsibility. Conservatives are often criticized for emphasizing personal responsibility so much. But it's important to note that personal responsibility is not synonymous with rampant, unregulated individualism. Conservatives believe in charity. Indeed, most social scientific studies demonstrate that self-identifying conservatives give much more time and money away to charitable organizations than self-identifying liberals. But no matter how hard life is, and no matter how important it is for the haves to help the have-nots, people must be held accountable for their own actions. There's no better way to see how this conservative principle works than to look right here at Wabash College. The college provides all the help that a student could ask for, including generous financial aid, and yet in the end, as you know, it is up to each and every student to make the most of his experience here. You have to own Wabash, private property, to make it work. You have to work at Wabash to make it work for you. When you don't work for something, you won't appreciate it. When you don't own something, you won't try to preserve it and protect it. A fourth principle is that people are absolutely equal in dignity and rights, even though individuals vary dramatically in talents, opportunities, abilities, and yes, biology. You can't improve the world by favoring one group over another. Conservatives take seriously the claim that all men are created equally from the Declaration of Independence. They take it seriously because conservatives acknowledge the importance of recognizing that our equality comes from being members of a human family created by God. Our equality doesn't come from anywhere else. Look around you. It doesn't come from biology, it doesn't come from culture, it doesn't come from wealth, from parents, from anything, but from being created as a family by God. It follows that competition is not a dirty word for conservatives, and I know of no college that fosters competition like Wabash. It also follows that conservatives have no problem in acknowledging the many ways that people are different from each other. Indeed, conservatives believe that the most fundamental difference within the human family is the difference between being a man and a woman. And again, Wabash honors those differences by being single-sex. Men and women complement each other. Their differences make possible some of the best parts, some of the most pleasurable parts of being human. The union of one man and one woman in marriage is still, after how many years, thousands, millions, the best way to raise children, which is why conservatives believe that the state should do what it can to preserve, promote, and protect the marriage of one man to one woman. Nonetheless, conservatives believe that gays should be treated with the utmost respect and that gay relationships can be honored and their partnership contracts secured with all the benefits of civil society without promoting gay relationships to the status of marriage. The fifth principle follows from the fourth, and that is the sanctity of the family. There is no better way to limit the overreach of government than through recognizing that parents have an almost absolute right to raise their children according to their own beliefs and values. Needless to say, this right does not permit parents to abuse their children, but it certainly does not permit the government to abuse children by imposing a financial burden on their parents to erect a public school system that is becoming, for most Americans, a colossal disaster. How does Wabash fit into this principle? That's easy. We are a private school. We believe in educational choice. We believe that not all schools have to be the same. We believe that educators should have the freedom to provide real alternatives in the educational marketplace. We also let students form their own families at Wabash in the form of fraternities. And we do our best, when we are at our best, to keep our noses out of those family structures. A sixth principle is that societies cannot survive without some kind of religious substance to guide them. Conservatives are not all religious, and religious conservatives are not all members of the same religion. But it really is rare to find a conservative who thinks that societies can prosper and flourish in the absence of strong religious institutions. Communism, after all, conservatives have long argued, could not prosper not only because of its ridiculous economic theory, but even more because it was godless. Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote about America more eloquently than anybody before or since, argued that what makes American democracy and capitalism work so well is that they are tempered by religion. He spoke of a three-legged stool: capitalism, democracy, and religion. Capitalism without the counterbalance of strong religious institutions ends up making the accumulation of wealth an end in itself, an ultimate value, while democracy without religion ends up with the rule of the majority, with the government answering to nothing higher than the whims of the mob. What about Wabash and its relationship to this principle? Well, Wabash used to be an explicitly Christian college up to the 40s. But nowadays it has a good balance, I think, I hope, between being an independent institution of higher learning that nonetheless acknowledges, honors, and promotes its religious heritage. Even those on campus who are not religious can and should appreciate the fact that I am speaking in a chapel, where a symbol of how much this institution values its roots in the Christian church. Now, this principle, the sixth, about the societal need for religious substance, is probably the most contentious conservative principle today, because many hyper-secularized liberals want to cleanse religion from the public square. Their rationale is twofold. First, they think there is a high wall of separation between church and state written into the Constitution. About that, they are simply wrong. The Supreme Court, that phrase doesn't appear in the Constitution, and the Supreme Court is only at the beginning of a long process of undoing the damage that the so-called high wall of pure fiction has caused in this country. Second, they argue that everything having to do with the public, every square inch of any government-related program, activity, or physical space should be religion-free, because otherwise atheists will be forced to see something religious and thus will be deeply offended. The fear of being annoyed, a psychological plague that evidently is devastating the inner lives of countless secular liberals. Leads to the seventh principle. Conservatives believe in a nearly absolute affirmation of free speech. A student once complimented me for the passion and clarity of my position after I gave a talk at Wabash. But he then asked me if I'd ever changed my mind about anything. He seemed to think that because I have clear convictions and principles that I must have never changed my mind. And he said, have you ever changed your mind about anything? I told them, in fact, he seemed to equate conservatism with unchanging, with being unchanging, with unbending absolutism and immovable principles. I told him that as a good conservative, I believe in reason. I believe in open and fair debate. And that's actually why I have changed so much over the years. I thought of myself as a radical Protestant postmodernist in college. And thanks to much reading, listening to colleagues, listening to students, I've changed to being a conservative Catholic traditionalist. That's a major change. But why have I changed? Because I learned to listen to tradition and to reason, and to those who were my betters. Change is good as long as it is guided by faith and reason. Now, Wabash is obviously squarely within this tradition of free speech. We do not, at our best, punish students or faculty for speaking out on any issue. Even the pound everyone email option is an open forum that cannot and should not be regulated for the good of free speech on our campus. Thank you. What is the source, by the way, of America's commitment to free speech? The answer is obvious. People of faith came to this land to found a country where people could speak freely about their faith. And that goal is still something we need to work toward achieving. Nobody has the right not to be annoyed. It's not in the Constitution. Getting offended is the right we pay to have a free society. When you are offended, you do not have the right to try to use political power of any kind to punish the person who offended. Perhaps the reason more liberals than conservatives are so sensitive to being annoyed is that more liberals than conservatives do not have children. Think about it. Gentlemen, the more children you have, the more you accept the fact that to be alive is to be annoyed. In fact, there are demographic studies that show that people who are more liberal do have fewer children. I mean, people in the big cities on both coasts don't have many children. It's a yuppie phenomena, and they have nice, tidy lives. They have no one at home yelling at them, expecting something from them. They're not annoyed. And so when they go out into their workplace or something, if something annoys them, they think that they have been violated in some way. Well, have children, you'll get over that. On a more serious note, there is a connection, I think, between militantly secularist disdain for religion and the climate of political correctness that rules so much of our higher education. Higher education, stripped of the divine, loses its sacred dimension and becomes little more than a finishing school for the purpose of teaching students how to behave in civil society. For many professors today, tolerance is the highest value. But the result is that any view that does not tolerate every other view is not itself tolerated. In other words, liberal views that tend toward social and moral relativism and idealistic political utopianism are tolerated, but conservative views that are committed to universal moral claims and political realism are not tolerated. Things have gotten so bad that even the New York Times has taken notice. On January 9th, they published an article about Teresa Wagner, a conservative Republican who was turned down for a teaching position at the law school of the University of Iowa, even though she came well recommended, because the dean, and the emails collected demonstrate this, the dean despised her politics. A unanimous three-judge panel at the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit let her suit go forward. By its own admission, by the law school's own admission, there are over 50 law professors at Iowa, and only one of them is a registered Republican. The dean of the law school responded to the panel's ruling by saying that courts should not be used to solve social problems. The dean said, and I quote, "Lawsuits can intrude on collegiality, empowering some people with sharp elbows to sue their way into faculty jobs, all while costing a lot of money and grief," end quote. Gentlemen, that was the dean of a law school who said that. A law school saying that lawsuits shouldn't be used to fix social problems. Well, it shouldn't be used to fix social problems when you, the lawyer, and the law school are the victim, but you will certainly use them to fix other problems. The eighth principle is a commitment to small government. Power should stay in the hands of local authorities as much as possible. The more bureaucracy you have, the harder it is to respond to the situation on the ground. The harder it is to listen to those who are actually affected by your political decisions. Wabash traditionally has been very anti-bureaucratic. We are too small to need elaborate systems of paperwork, forms, meetings, and rules to get things done. We are a face-to-face community with the faculty and students at the center, and the staff, including the administrative staff, existing to serve the faculty and students. Now, there is nothing wrong with being a servant. I use that word in all of its richness because those who serve are given the greatest opportunities for acting out of love. But just as you would not go into a restaurant and ask the waitstaff to cook your dinner or ask the cook to pay for your meal, you should not go to college, and you can finish that analogy for yourself. The ninth principle is a basic trust in the common sense of the average person. As that common sense has been formed and shaped through centuries of Western culture, the corollary of this principle is a basic mistrust of cultural elites. Conservatives are skeptics when it comes to professionals who want to remake human nature by telling the rest of us how we should live our lives. Liberals tend to believe in experts when it comes to cultural matters, but try to play on populism when it comes to economic matters. But conservatives are just the opposite. Think about it. Conservatives rely on experts for economic matters, but are populist when it comes to cultural matters. I think Wabash honors this principle by trusting students to know what is best for them. Finally, the 10th principle is that conservatives take enmity, the fact of having enemies, seriously. We live in a fallen world. We have enemies. We have to protect what we own. We have to defend and protect the values that we are committed to. And of all the principles I've stated today, Wabash understands and practices and puts into practice this principle even better than any of the others. Because at Wabash, DePaul to Hell is not a slogan, it's a way of life. Thank you very much.
A couple of announcements. Tomorrow afternoon, there are no classes. Please go to the celebration of student research to share in your colleagues' academic work. Over the last year, that starts at 1 p.m. over in Detchen Hall. Wrestling competes on Friday and Saturday at Wheaton College. On Saturday, track is at Rose-Hulman. Swimming is at Illinois Wesleyan. The alumni basketball game starts at 1 p.m., and basketball competes against the Big Red of Denison University at 3 p.m. Sigma Chi, in conjunction with Wabash College and the Special Olympics, is hosting a basketball tournament next Saturday, February the 4th. Vic Wagner from the Sigma Chi House will be coming around to ask for volunteers for officials, scores, timers, etc. Also, the Ryans will be at the back of chapel at the conclusion today collecting donations for the family of Jake Peacock. Jake Peacock, a senior who was injured in an automobile accident, hoping to collect money to help defray the cost of perhaps purchasing gas cards for Jake's family to travel between Crawfordsville and Bloomington. Please rise and sing Old Wabash. From the hills of Maine to western plain, or where the cotton's blowing, the gloomy shade of the northern pine, the line of southern sea. There's a name held dear in a color we cheer wherever we find it glowing. The tears shall rise for longing eyes and floats of the evening breeze. When day is done, the western sun is painted flash of glory. Across the skies, the skies of color we love so well. We love the citizens' shout, split and praise the song story. We love the shouts of light dies out a good old Wabash. Our prayers are always thine, our voices and hearts combine to sing thy praise in future days shall bring thy name before us. When college days are past, as long as life shall last, our greatest joy will be to shout the chorus. Dear old Wabash, thy loyal sons shall ever love thee. And o'er the classic halls, the scarlet flag shall proudly flash. Go Wabash, long in our hearts will bear the sweetest memories of thee. Long shall we sing thy praises, old Wabash. And loud and long shall echo the song till hills and valley ringing. Spread the fame of her honor name wherever the breezes blow. To sweet and clear the world shall hear the sons of Wabash singing. And flying free the world shall see thy scarlet banner go. The honors won by his loyal son, and highest rank shall stay forevermore. As in days of yore their deeds be noble and grand. Then once again ye Wabash men, 3 cheers for all honor. Would every flower feared by all may she an equal stand. Our prayers are always thine, our voices and hearts combine to sing thy praise in future days shall bring thy name before us. When college days are past, as long as life shall last, our greatest joy will be to shout the chorus.